We're in Wisconsin. It's below freezing at night and above freezing during the day. That can only mean one thing. It means it's time to tap these 4 maple trees behind me. That's what's going to get started today. We'll take you through this maple syrup making process. Pretty cool. The first step is drilling holes in the trees. Best to drill on the south side if you can, and if there's a crotch, that's a great place to be, right below the crotch, because you'll have a lot of sap flow there. I don't stick with only the south side. I'll put about 3 taps into a tree this size. It's really cool when you see that sap start to flow immediately. There are all sorts of ways you can capture the sap. Old ice cream pails, 5-gallon buckets. I like these sap-specific collection bags. I'll generally get about 5 gallons of sap a day off of these 4 trees, provided the sun is out and the sap is flowing. From the 5-gallon bucket, I transfer it into a 35-gallon barrel in the garage. Don't worry about the leaf, it all gets filtered later. Now it's time to set up to boil. That evaporating tray is a big rectangle, very intentionally. Want a lot of surface area there. I'm going to explain this little kettle later. Next thing is set up a filter on a 5-gallon bucket. I want to pour all the sap through that filter just to make sure that any big crud or debris gets filtered out before I start the boiling process. The filtered sap gets poured into the evaporating pan. My evaporating pan is just the bottom of a chafing dish. Got it off of Amazon. Look at how nice and clear the sap is right now. I want you to remember that later when we get further along in the boiling process. Next step, light up the stove. So I think this is kind of the cool part. The main vat is boiling. Now here's what you're trying to make happen is for that level of sap to continue boiling, but we got to keep adding sap to it. We don't want it to boil down. And of course there's like 30 gallons of sap in here. It's got to end up in there. So this pot goes here, and there's a tiny little hole drilled in this pot. It's about a 1/16 of an inch. So that's going to sit like this. Woo! It's hot. And then some of the filtered sap goes into this thing. Like that. And then see how that's poured in. So the theory, if I have the hole in the pot right, is you don't want the sap here to ever stop boiling. So this should be adding sap at a rate that doesn't exceed, I don't want to add, you can't add cold sap so fast that the boil stops here. Otherwise, of course, too, this thing will overflow. So anyway, what happens from here on out is just keep this full and let it slowly drain into this. This continues to boil, 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 and eventually it'll be syrup. Every once in a while, you got to stop and scoop the foam off the top of the evaporating tray. A lot of people say that leaving the foam on there reduces the ability for the liquid to evaporate. All 35 gallons of sap have now found their way into that evaporating tray. The reduction in volume by boiling is just incredible. One way to monitor your progress is by watching the temperature. I'm doing it with a digital infrared thermometer. Candy thermometer would be an alternative. Syrup boils 7 degrees hotter than water, so it's a good way to know where you're at. Look at how dark the liquid is here. When it starts to foam heavily, you really got to watch it closely. At this point, if you're not careful, it's easy to burn it. I'm convinced that a hydrometer is worth every penny. It takes the guesswork out of knowing when you're done. Watch it float to that second red line. That tells us the density is just right, and that's syrup. Syrup gets filtered one more time just to make sure there aren't any ickies in it before it goes into the bottles. Then into a measuring cup, just to make it easy to pour. From there, through a funnel and into these bottles. I ended up with 15 6-ounce bottles of syrup, so 80 ounces of syrup from 35 gallons of sap. The higher the sugar content of your sap, the more syrup you're going to end up with. So the better the maple trees you're tapping, the more syrup you're going to end up with. Final test, pour it on pancakes and see what it tastes like. When you're done collecting sap, pull those taps out of the trees. those holes will heal right over and that tree will be ready to give us sap again next year. Now, the economics of making your own syrup aren't that great, especially if you're using propane for a heat source. I use 3 20-pound tanks of propane to end up with my 80 ounces of syrup. However, I really enjoy doing it. It's a lot of fun. When my kids were little, they really liked participating in that. It was a pretty cool process for them to watch. Gives you an idea of why real maple syrup is so darn expensive. So hope you enjoyed watching this and learning a little bit about making your own maple syrup. You're kind of irritating.